tutorial is for 4th grade, Module 6, Lesson 3. In this lesson, we're going to start by looking at decimals using place value discs. The directions say to circle groups of tenths to make as many ones as possible. Well, I know that it takes 10 tenths to make one whole. In my first box, I'm going to circle this group of 10 tenths because that is equal to one whole. And I can circle another group of 10 tenths, and that would give me a second whole. I will leave the remaining discs as is because there aren't 10 of them, so I can't make another whole. Altogether, in this box, I have 28 tenths. I have 10 to make one whole, 20 to make the two wholes, and then 8 more. So altogether, there are 28 tenths. Now we're going to take these tenths and change them into wholes in the next box. The directions say to shade in the same number using ones and tenths. So this first group of 10 tenths, I'm going to compose into one whole, and I'll shade that in the next box. So here I have my first group of 10 tenths represented as one whole. Now I'm going to do the same thing for my second group of 10 tenths. I'll shade in another whole. Here's my second group of 10 tenths composed into one whole. Now all I have to do is show the rest of my discs in the bottom portion. So I'm going to shade in 8 tenths to finish out the number. Now my number is completely shaded in. I have 2 wholes and 8 tenths. In decimal form, I would write the 2 in the ones place, then my decimal, and the 8 in the tenths place to show 2 and 8 tenths. The final question is how much more is needed to get to 3, or in other words, 3 wholes. You can see by our diagram that we need 2 more tenths to make that third whole. So I'll write that in decimal format. I need 2 tenths to get to 3 wholes. In the next section, we have the unit form of a number, and we're going to write it in fraction expanded form and in decimal expanded form. My first unit form number is 4 tens, 2 ones, and 6 tenths. Well, 4 tens would be 40, which is the same thing as 4 times 10. 2 ones would be 2 times 1. 6 tenths would be 6 times 1 tenth. Altogether, I have 40 plus 2 plus 6 tenths, which gives me 42 and 6 tenths. The decimal form is very similar. For my whole numbers, I still have 4 times 10, 2 times 1. Now 6 times 1 tenth will be written in decimal form. Above it is the same number written in fraction form. Again, I still have 40 plus 2 plus 6 tenths, but I'm going to write the 6 tenths as a decimal. That gives me 42 and 6 tenths. These two numbers are the same. One is written in fraction form, one in decimal form. Now let's do the same thing in problem B. I have 110, so that will be 1 times 10, 7 ones, that would be 7 times 1, and 5 tenths, which would be 5 times 1 tenth as a fraction. Well, 1 times 10 is 10, 7 times 1 is 7, 5 times 1 tenth is 5 tenths. My total then is 17 and 5 tenths. We'll do the same thing in decimal form. Again, the whole numbers are written the same, so I still have 1 times 10 and 7 times 1. This time I have 5 times 1 tenth written as a decimal. I still have 10 plus 7 plus 5 tenths. And as a decimal, that would be 17 and 5 tenths. And again, these two numbers are the same. One's just written as a fraction and one is written as a decimal. In my last section, I have a chart showing various forms of a number. If I look across the first row, I need to represent 3 and 9/10 as a point on a number line, as in decimal form, in expanded decimal form, and then the last column asks, how close am I to getting to the next whole? So let's start by looking at 3 and 9/10 on the number line. 3 and 9/10 is between the whole numbers of 3 and 4, and I just need to count over 9/10 from the 3 whole points. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So here's 3 and 9/10. You can see it's very close to making 4 wholes. I'm going to write 3 and 9/10 in decimal format. I have 3 wholes and 9/10. And in expanded form, I have 3 times 1 to represent my 3 wholes, and then 9 times 1/10 to represent the 9/10, for a total of 3 and 9/10. And you can see, if you look back to our number line, we're 1/10 away from making 4 wholes, and that's why we have 1/10 in that column. Let's look at the next example. This time I'm given the point on the number line. It's in between 7 and 8. I'm not quite to 8 yet, so I know that I have 7 wholes, and then I just need to count. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/10 on the number line. So I'll put the 5/10 as my decimal. As a mixed number then, I have 7 wholes and 5/10. And in expanded form, I have 7 times 1 to give me 7 wholes, and then 5 groups of 1/10 to give me the 5/10. And again, in decimal form, that would be 7 and 5/10. Now, if I look back at the number line, I still have 5 more tenths to get me to 8 wholes. So we'll write that in decimal format. So again, decimals and fractions are the same thing. They're just written in different formats.